who is a Child Protection Programs Manager at Save the Children South Africa. Divya, thanks very much indeed. You must be also quite disappointed that in the end the quality of the evidence wasn't really tested because of the way that it was gathered and presented in the end. So we never really got to understand whether something happened or not.
Thank you, Peter, for having me on today. Yes, it is indeed a very sad day for our country when opportunities like this come in very far and few between. Because we know the large scale of abuse, particularly around sexual molestation and assault of children, very few of those matters actually reach the point of going to court. Large numbers are just dropped off even before it gets to that point. So it's really sad when a matter reaches that point and it comes there. And then you have a judge who has to make a judgment like this because there's not enough evidence. And you know, from hearing just now also all of the details of it and how many errors were made at all levels, it is very concerning. Because then children in the end are the ones who are victims again. They face secondary abuse because people would start questioning about whether they were actually telling the truth. And then those who really experienced this are traumatized by the process.
So, you know, I'm just trying to make sense of all of this. The judge having to tell the prosecutors their conduct and how they're supposed to behave and how they're supposed to do their job must mean that it could be that other cases, many other cases, may have been compromised over the years.
It does leave questions open.
So tell us about what children have to go through in terms of preparing to give evidence, because that process itself must be quite difficult for them.
It is a very important process, and I think using this as an example, what happens generally is then there's a process of where children are interviewed by the police and a statement is taken. I think in this case also, if you look at the time frame, when the first allegation was made to the school principal around February, and then the person was only actually arrested around October. So there's about an 8-month period within which, so sometimes in that time loss as well, children do get confused about like simple things like dates. They were not able to, because the child's not going to remember something as specific as a date. So those become loopholes for the defense legal counsel to argue about. But in the preparation for children, there's the interview by the police, and then generally children start, there's a therapy process, and then the social worker or therapist will work with them. The key things that are covered during that process is that children need to understand you've got to tell them the truth, be honest, tell exactly what happened, but you don't coax children to tell them what. Now, I don't know exactly all the details of why the judge made that statement, because I haven't read the full proceedings at this point, but I will at some point go back and look at that. But I think it's quite a critical point of what the judge says about the fact that it appears that children have been coaxed. So there must be some valid reason for why the judge would have said that. And in fact, in court, made certain statements towards the prosecutor. And that's very concerning, because that is an injustice to children being able to realize that right to safety and to being able to get justice when something like this happens.
So in preparing children to be ready for court and to give their testimony, where does one draw the line between preparation and then crossing into that area where it starts to become coaching and getting them towards, because children by their nature don't want to let down adults, and they'll start to go down, I suppose, tempted to go down a line that they think the adult thinks is right.
Absolutely, absolutely. Children will have a tendency, they're very influential by us as adults, and so it's easy for adults to just manipulate children, and therefore in terms of a professional code of ethics, both from the point of the way the social workers or therapists work with children, as well as the way the police will interview the children. I mean, in this situation, for example, if you look at the fact that at the school they called all of the children together, that's something you don't do, because besides the fact of children being pressurized by each other and influencing each other, this is also a very personal. So sometimes children who've actually experienced are embarrassed and they're not going to say something publicly. And teachers are not in a position to start to do something like this. They should have when the first allegation came in. And that for me is a critical point. When the first allegation happened in February, we could have prevented a lot from happening. And that should have happened immediately by calling in the right people to act, rather than the schools and the teachers and the principal trying to take charge of the situation. Maybe with good intention, and that's understandable, but it's not their role. And we need to be very clear in how we draw the line between whose responsibility is to investigate and to do the work.
All right, so the teachers, schools, they're not trained professionals. One can understand perhaps the mistakes they make. But, you know, people like the Teddy Bear Clinic, we will be talking to them a little bit later on, they were cited by the judge, and I just wonder, is it common practice to bring in third parties to assist in this kind of interview and preparation scenario?
Yes, you see, what happens is that it is common practice for there to be support from proper professionals to help. And there are many organizations that provide that kind of support and service, so that children get prepared, so that they go to court and then they're ready for it. I think, and again, I don't know the details specifically of that, but what I would think is that what we need to look at, and again, once I read through the documentation of exactly what the judge has said, but I think what's critical is that those who are there supposed to help the children must not in any way influence what the children are going to say. And it's in that process one has to also assess whether children are actually ready to go on as witnesses. So you do not put a child who's not ready, who's confused, to give evidence in a matter, because then that's a big problem. You're setting the child up for failure.
All right, and then perhaps finally, what kind of intervention do these children need now going forward, given, you know, this decision has been made and they've gone through this process and there's no result?
What needs to happen is that now, depending on the level of trauma that the children are experiencing, depending on, because children also deal with the situations differently, so they would need some kind of ongoing therapy and support. The parents will also need to be able to be supported as well, so that together they can work through what's happened. I think beyond this also, something needs to be done to look at in terms of what are schools doing when they employ people? Do they do due diligence? Do they check, do background checks of people? Do police clearance checks? Do they look at the child protection register? Because you know, we know for a fact that people who are pedophiles, people who want to molest children, people who do this, will go to places like this in schools. So there needs to be proper due diligence to make sure that children are safe. But these children will definitely need a lot of counseling, a lot of therapy, and work with them so that they work through what's happening, not just about the fact of what's happened to them the first time, but also the fact that they had to relive all of that when they went through the court process.
All right, Divya, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very much indeed. Always a pleasure talking to you and getting your thoughts on these very important issues. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Peter.